The radiologist's face went white as she stared at my 10-year-old son's brain scan. "Mr. Thompson," she whispered, pointing at a shadow near his skull, "this fracture. If it had been just 2 millimeters deeper, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Your son could have died." Before we dive deeper, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more intense betrayal and revenge stories. And let us know where you are listening in the comments. I felt my world tilt sideways as I stared at the X-ray images scattered across the light board. My son Danny sat on the examination table, his leg in a cast, completely unaware that he'd nearly lost his life 3 weeks ago. The same day my wife Melissa told me he'd accidentally fallen down the stairs at her office. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" I asked, my military training kicking in as I processed this new intelligence. 15 years in special forces had taught me to stay calm under pressure, but this was different. This was my son. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. "The impact pattern is consistent with blunt force trauma. Someone struck him with significant force right here." She traced the fracture line with her pen, and the angle suggests it wasn't a fall. This was deliberate. My blood turned to ice. Danny looked up at me with those innocent brown eyes, the same ones that had looked at me 3 weeks ago when he limped through our front door, tears streaming down his face. Melissa had rushed to explain before I could even ask questions. "He was playing in my office while I finished some paperwork," she'd said, wrapping her arms around Danny protectively. "You know how clumsy he gets when he's excited." He tripped running down the hallway and hit his head on the corner of Richard's desk. Richard, her boss. The man who'd been calling our house at strange hours, sending my wife expensive gifts from the whole office, and somehow always needing Melissa to work late nights and weekends. "Danny," I said softly, kneeling down to his eye level, "can you tell Dr. Martinez exactly what happened that day at Mommy's office?" My son's face immediately changed. The color drained from his cheeks, and his small hands started trembling. I fell down," he whispered, but his eyes darted away from mine. "It's okay, buddy. You can tell me the truth. I promise no one will be mad at you." Danny's lip started quivering. The big man with the loud voice, he got really angry when I accidentally knocked over his coffee cup. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me really hard. And then Danny's voice broke into sobs. He pushed me backward, and I hit my head on his desk. "But Mommy said I had to say I fell down, or the man would fire her, and we wouldn't have any money." The room went dead silent. Dr. Martinez looked at me with a mixture of horror and understanding. I felt something cold and dangerous settling in my chest, the same feeling I'd had in Afghanistan when we'd identified high-value targets. "Danny, what's the man's name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Mr. Richard. He's Mommy's boss. He told me if I ever told anyone what really happened, he'd make sure Mommy lost her job and we'd have to live in our car." Danny wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Daddy, I was so scared." His hands were so big, and he was so angry about the stupid coffee. I stood up slowly, my mind already calculating. "Richard Morrison, 42 years old, regional sales director for Morrison Pharmaceutical, married with 2 daughters of his own, and apparently someone who thought it was acceptable to assault a 10-year-old child and then threaten him into silence." "Dr. Martinez," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "I need you to document everything, every single detail of these injuries. I need a full medical report." She nodded immediately. "Of course. And Mr. Thompson, I'm legally required to report suspected child abuse to authorities." "Good. Do it." As we drove home, Danny fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from finally telling the truth. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, this beautiful, innocent kid who'd been carrying this terrible secret for 3 weeks to protect his mother's career. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Working late again tonight. Richard needs me to finish the quarterly reports. Don't wait up." I stared at that message for a long time, pieces of a much larger puzzle starting to fall into place. The late nights. The new clothes. The way she'd been distant and jumpy lately. The expensive jewelry she claimed was a bonus from work. And now this. My son nearly killed, terrorized into silence, while my wife covered for the man who'd hurt him. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the dark for a moment, watching our house, the home I'd worked so hard to provide for my family. The rage was still there, cold and patient, but something else was growing alongside it. Something that felt like betrayal, deeper and more painful than anything I'd experienced in combat. Because in war, at least you knew who your enemies were. That night, I waited until Danny was fast asleep before I made my move. Melissa had texted again around midnight saying she'd be staying at her sister's house because the work session ran too late. Her sister lived 40 minutes away in the opposite direction from her office. I activated the tactical mindset I'd used in classified operations overseas. Target assessment, intelligence gathering, strategic planning. First stop, Melissa's laptop. She'd left it charging in the kitchen, something she never did before. Password protected, but after watching her type it in dozens of times, I knew it was Danny's birthday, followed by our wedding year. Sloppy operational security. Her email inbox told a story that made my stomach turn. Months of messages between her and Richard Morrison that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or pharmaceutical sales. Hotel reservations. Weekend getaways she'd claimed were work conferences. Restaurant receipts from dates that happened while I thought she was grocery shopping. But it was the photos that broke something inside me. Pictures of them together in hotel rooms, at expensive restaurants, laughing and intimate in ways Melissa and I hadn't been in over a year. She looked happy, genuinely happy, happier than I'd seen her in our own home. The most recent email thread made my blood freeze. Richard, the kid needs to learn to stay out of adult spaces. Maybe this will teach him some respect. Melissa, he's just a child, Richard. You didn't need to be so rough with him. Richard, your husband's military background makes me nervous. Think he believed the false story. Melissa, Jake's not stupid, but he trusts me. As long as Danny keeps quiet, we'll be fine. Richard, I made sure the boy understands what happens to families that don't mind their own business. Little coward was shaking like a leaf. I read that exchange 3 times, each time feeling something die inside my chest. My wife knew. She knew Richard had deliberately hurt our son, knew he'd terrorized Danny into silence, and she was actively helping cover it up to protect their affair. 20 minutes later, I was parked across the street from the Morrison Pharmaceutical building, studying the security setup. Old habits die hard. 3 security cameras, motion sensors on the main doors, but the loading dock in the back had a blind spot. The night janitor arrived at 2 a.m. and left by 6. I wasn't planning to break in. Not yet. I was mapping the terrain, understanding my enemy's territory. Richard Morrison had no idea he'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 15 years learning how to dismantle threats to innocent people. My phone buzzed with another text from Melissa. Everything okay at home? Danny's sleeping well. The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally asking about the well-being of the child she'd helped someone terrorize. I typed back, he's fine. Had some interesting dreams though. Says he remembers more about his accident now. Her response came back immediately. What do you mean? He already told us what happened. Kids have a way of remembering details when they feel safe, don't they? 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before she finally responded. We'll talk when I get home tomorrow. I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind already 3 steps ahead. Richard Morrison thought he'd won by silencing my son and manipulating my wife. He thought his position, his money, and his intimidation tactics made him untouchable. He was about to learn the difference between a civilian bully and someone trained to eliminate high-value targets. Back in Danny's room, I watched my son sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. His cast looked enormous on his small leg, a visible reminder of what Richard had done to him. But it was the invisible damage I was worried about, the fear, the guilt, The lesson that violence wins and victims should stay quiet. I made a silent promise to my sleeping son. Richard Morrison would face consequences for what he'd done. Not vigilante justice, not reckless revenge. Something much more devastating. Strategic, systematic, complete. The man had broken my son's body and terrorized his spirit. But he'd made one critical tactical error. He'd underestimated his target's father. The next morning, I called in sick to work, first time in 3 years. Danny was at school, and I had 8 hours of uninterrupted operational time before Melissa returned from her sister's emergency family situation. I started with Richard Morrison's digital footprint. Public records showed he'd been married to Patricia Morrison for 18 years. 2 daughters, Emma and Sophie, ages 12 and 14. Perfect suburban family man on paper. His LinkedIn profile boasted about company charity drives and community involvement. But social media told a different story. Photos from business trips that matched dates from Melissa's email conversations. Check-ins at expensive hotels during times when Patricia posted about being home alone with sick kids. The man was sloppy, confident that his executive position protected him from consequences. By noon, I'd compiled a complete psychological profile. Richard Morrison was a predator who used his corporate authority to manipulate subordinates. The emails between him and Melissa weren't just about an affair. They revealed a pattern of emotional manipulation, financial pressure, and veiled threats about her job security. My phone rang. Danny's school. Mr. Thompson? This is Principal Hayes. Danny had another incident today. He completely shut down during PE class when Coach Williams raised his voice about the basketball drill. We had to call the school counselor. My jaw tightened. I'll be right there. I found Danny in the counselor's office, curled up in a chair that looked enormous around his small frame. His eyes were red, and he was clutching the stress ball Mrs. Patterson had given him. Hey, buddy, I said softly, kneeling beside his chair. Rough day. Danny nodded, not meeting my eyes. Coach Williams got angry when I couldn't run fast enough with my cast. He yelled just like. His voice trailed off. Just like Mr. Richard? My son's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. You're not supposed to know that name. He said, Danny, listen to me very carefully. I took his small hands in mine. Mr. Richard lied to you. He can't hurt our family anymore. And mommy's job is not your responsibility to protect. That's what adults are supposed to handle. But what if he gets mad again? What if he hurts you like he hurt me? The innocent fear in my son's voice triggered something primal in me. This child had been carrying adult-sized terror for weeks, convinced that his silence was protecting his family from a dangerous man. Son, I need you to understand something important. Mr. Richard might seem scary to you, but I've dealt with much scarier people. I'm trained to handle bullies like him. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat gently. Mr. Thompson, Danny's been having nightmares about the angry man for 3 weeks now. He's exhibiting classic signs of trauma from assault. I strongly recommend counseling and... She hesitated. Has this been reported to authorities? As of yesterday, yes. There's an ongoing investigation. The school counselor's expression shifted to relief mixed with concern. Good. Danny, your dad is absolutely right. Adults who hurt children always tell them to keep secrets, but secrets about someone hurting you are never good secrets. On the drive home, Danny was quiet for a long time before he finally spoke. Daddy, when mommy comes home, will you tell her that I told the truth about what happened? The question hit me like a physical blow. My 10-year-old son was asking me to confess his honesty to his own mother, because somewhere deep down, he knew she'd been complicit in forcing him to lie. Danny, your mother and I need to have some very serious conversations about what happened. But I promise you this, you will never have to see Mr. Richard again, and you will never have to lie about what he did to you. What about mommy's job? I pulled into our driveway and turned to face my son. Buddy, there are more important things in this world than any job. Your safety, your happiness, your right to feel secure. Those things matter more than any paycheck. As we walked into the house, My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stay out of business that doesn't concern you, soldier boy. Some battles aren't worth fighting. I stared at that message for a long moment, then showed it to my phone's screenshot function. Evidence collected. Threat documented. Richard Morrison had just made his second critical error. The first was hurting my son. The second was threatening me directly. He clearly had no idea what 15 years of special forces training had taught me about psychological warfare, strategic patience, and the complete dismantling of an enemy's entire world. But he was about to get an education. That afternoon, Richard Morrison made his biggest mistake yet. He showed up at my house. I was helping Danny with homework when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a silver BMW in my driveway and a man in an expensive suit adjusting his tie. Danny looked up from his math worksheet and his face went chalk white. Daddy, that's him. That's the angry man. Go to your room, buddy. Close the door. Danny scrambled upstairs while I opened the front door. Richard Morrison stood there with the arrogant smile of a man who'd never faced real consequences in his life. He was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 6'2", soft around the middle, but intimidating enough to terrify a 10-year-old. Jake Thompson, right? I'm Richard Morrison, Melissa's supervisor. He extended his hand like we were meeting at a barbecue. Mind if we chat? I didn't take his hand. My property. Start talking. His smile faltered slightly. Look, there seems to be some confusion about what happened at the office. Kids have wild imaginations, especially after accidents. Sometimes they mix up dreams with reality. My son doesn't have wild imaginations about being assaulted. Assaulted? Richard laughed, but there was nervousness behind it. Come on, man. He tripped and fell. Happens to clumsy kids all the time. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, moving into his personal space. Military intimidation tactics 101. Here's what's going to happen, Richard. You're going to walk back to your car, drive away, and never contact my family again. Instead of backing down, he puffed up his chest. Or what? You'll what, soldier? Beat me up? I know all about your background. Melissa told me you're some kind of special forces hotshot. The fact that my wife had discussed my military service with this man, her affair partner who'd hurt our son, sent a surge of cold rage through me. She also mentioned you've got anger issues, Richard continued, pulling out his phone. PTSD, drinking problems, violent outbursts. One called the Child Protective Services, and they'll remove Danny from this house faster than you can say court-martial. He just threatened to have my son taken away. The same child he'd terrorized and injured. You know what else Melissa told me? Richard stepped closer, his breath smelling like expensive cologne and arrogance. She told me about your nightmares, your paranoia, how you check locks 3 times every night. She's worried about Danny's safety around you. The psychological profile was crystal clear now. Richard Morrison was a master manipulator who used intimate knowledge as weapons. He'd convinced my wife to betray her own husband's vulnerabilities, then used that information to threaten my relationship with my son. She's already contacted a lawyer about emergency custody, he continued, especially after your threatening text messages last night. I hadn't sent any threatening messages, which meant he was either lying or... My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Jake, Richard showed me the violent messages you sent him. We need to talk when I get home. I'm scared. Richard held up his phone, showing me screenshots of text messages that appeared to come from my number. Crude, violent threats about what I'd do to him if he came near my family. Messages I'd never sent. Technology's amazing these days, he said with a smug grin. Easy to fake text messages, especially when you know someone's phone number and personal details. This man had systematically planned to destroy my credibility, isolate me from my son, and eliminate me as a threat to his relationship with my wife. He'd hurt Danny, manipulated Melissa, and now he was trying to frame me as an unstable veteran. Professional, calculated, ruthlessly efficient. I underestimated you, I said quietly. Richard's grin widened. Most people do. I didn't get to be regional director by playing nice. Your wife understands that. Soon your son will too. Wrong answer. Richard, I said, my voice steady and calm. You just made a fatal tactical error. Yeah? What's that? You assumed I was playing by civilian rules. 20 minutes after Richard left, Melissa's car pulled into the driveway. She walked through the front door like she was entering a crime scene, her eyes darting around nervously. Jake, we need to talk. Now. I was sitting at the kitchen table, Danny's medical reports spread out in front of me alongside printed screenshots of her email conversations with Richard. Yes, we do. Her face went white when she saw the evidence. You went through my private emails? Your affair partner just threatened to have our son removed from my custody using fake text messages and your intimate knowledge of my military service. Melissa sank into the chair across from me, her hands trembling. Jake, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been sleeping with the man who assaulted our son, then helped him cover it up. Richard didn't assault Danny. It was an accident, and you're blowing this completely out of proportion. I slid the medical report across the table. Read it. The radiologist confirmed deliberate blunt force trauma. Danny could have died, Melissa. She glanced at the report, then pushed it away. Doctors always exaggerate. Richard explained what happened. Danny was running around where he shouldn't have been, and accidents happen. The casual dismissal of our son's near-death experience was breathtaking. Listen to yourself. You're defending the man who hurt our child. I'm defending the man I love. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth, but it was too late. You love him. I said it as a statement, not a question. Tears started streaming down her face. Jake, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Richard and we connected in ways that you and I never could. He understands my dreams, my ambitions. He sees me as more than just a wife and mother. He sees you as someone who'll betray her own family to protect his secrets. That's not fair. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Richard's marriage is complicated. His wife doesn't appreciate him, and she's threatening to take everything in a divorce. We're planning a future together once things settle down. I stared at my wife, this woman I'd loved for 12 years, who'd stood beside me through military deployments and career changes, and realized I was looking at a stranger. What about Danny? What about our son who's been having nightmares for 3 weeks because the man you love terrorized him? Danny will adjust. Kids are resilient. Richard's actually wonderful with children when they respect boundaries. Respect boundaries? He fractured our son's skull. Melissa stood up abruptly. I can't do this anymore, Jake. I can't pretend to be happy in a marriage that died years ago. Richard makes me feel alive again. So you're choosing him. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing what makes me happy. I watched her walk upstairs to pack her things, my mind processing this new intelligence. Melissa wasn't just having an affair. She was completely psychologically captured by Richard Morrison. He'd convinced her that her family was the problem, that her son's safety was less important than their relationship. 30 minutes later, she came downstairs with 2 suitcases. I'll be staying with Richard until I can find my own place. My lawyer will contact you about custody arrangements. Melissa, if you walk out that door, there's no coming back. She paused at the doorway. I know. I should have done this months ago. After she left, I found Danny sitting at the top of the stairs, tears streaming down his face. Is Mommy really not coming back? I climbed up and sat beside him. I don't know, buddy. But whatever happens, you and I are going to be okay. Did I make Mommy leave because I told the truth about Mr. Richard? No, son. Mommy made her own choices. Adult choices that had nothing to do with you being brave enough to tell the truth. That night, after Danny fell asleep, I made 3 phone calls. First, to my lawyer about emergency custody protection. Second, to my former commanding officer about a situation requiring specialized consultation. Third, to a private investigator who owed me a favor from Afghanistan. Richard Morrison had won this battle. He'd successfully isolated me, turned my wife against me, and painted me as an unstable threat. But wars aren't won by single battles. And he'd just given me the perfect motivation to end him completely. The private investigator's name was Marcus Chun, and he specialized in corporate espionage with a side business in personal security consulting. We'd worked together in Kandahar when he was Army intelligence and I was running classified operations. If you needed someone's entire life mapped out in 48 hours, Marcus was your man. Jake Thompson, he said when he answered my call at 11 p.m. Been wondering when you'd surface again. Heard you went domestic. I need a deep dive on someone. Corporate executive, thinks he's untouchable. How fast can you work? Depends on how deep you want me to go. Surface level corporate stuff. 24 hours. Full psychological profile with financial forensics and personal habits. 72 hours. I want everything, Marcus. Every secret, every weakness, every single thing this man doesn't want the world to know. There was a pause. This isn't about money, is it? He hurt my son. Say no more. Send me his details. By Friday, I'll know what he ate for breakfast in 3rd grade. While Marcus worked his magic, I focused on damage control. The custody hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, and Richard's fake text messages were already complicating things. My lawyer, Patricia Webb, was concerned about the narrative being built against me. Jake, they're painting you as an unstable veteran with PTSD and anger management issues. Combined with your wife's testimony about feeling unsafe, a judge might see you as a flight risk or danger to Danny. What do you need from me to counter that? Character witnesses, mental health evaluations, anything that demonstrates stability and good judgment. But honestly, the fake text messages are problematic. Even if we prove they're fabricated, it shows someone is actively targeting you, which could be seen as putting Danny in danger. That evening, Danny and I were eating dinner when he asked the question I'd been dreading. Daddy, are they going to make me live with Mommy and Mr. Richard? I set down my fork and looked at my son, really looked at him. In 3 weeks, he'd aged years. The carefree 10-year-old who used to bounce around the house telling jokes had been replaced by a quiet, fearful child who jumped at loud noises and asked permission for everything. Danny, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe and happy. But I need you to be brave a little longer, okay? What if Mr. Richard gets angry at me again? What if he hurts me worse next time? The innocent fear in his voice triggered something primal in my chest. Son, look at me. Mr. Richard is never going to hurt you again. I promise you that. But Mommy says he's a good man who just got frustrated. She says I need to give him another chance. My wife had actually told our traumatized son that he should give his attacker another chance. The psychological manipulation was more extensive than I'd realized. Danny, adults who hurt children always try to convince everyone it was the child's fault. That's how bullies operate. But you didn't do anything wrong, and you don't owe anyone a second chance to hurt you. Friday morning, Marcus called with results that exceeded even my expectations. Your boy Richard Morrison is a walking criminal enterprise, he said without preamble. Insurance fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement from his own company, and, this is the big one, he's been running a prescription drug resale operation using his pharmaceutical connections. Details: he's been diverting high-value medications from legitimate orders and selling them through a network of corrupt doctors and black market distributors. We're talking hundreds of thousands in illegal profits over the past 2 years. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Evidence: financial records, shipping manifests, recorded phone conversations with buyers. I've got enough evidence to put him away for 15 to 20 years on federal charges. What about personal vulnerabilities? His wife Patricia has been building her own divorce case for months. She's documented his affairs, his financial hiding tactics, and get this, she's been recording his phone calls at home. The woman knows exactly what kind of man she married. Anything else? The best part? His current girlfriend, your wife, isn't his only side piece. He's been running 3 different affairs simultaneously, including one with his children's babysitter. The man's a serial predator with a god complex. That afternoon, I made my decision about how to deploy this intelligence. This wasn't about revenge. It was about systematic dismantling of a threat to my family's safety. I started with Patricia Morrison. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, probably expecting some kind of confrontation between wronged spouses. Instead, she found a professional conversation about mutual interests. Mrs. Morrison, I believe we have a common problem. Patricia was an elegant woman in her early 40s, with the tired eyes of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for years. If you're here to blame me for your wife's choices, you're wasting both our time. I'm here to share information that might be useful in your divorce proceedings. I slid a folder across the table containing copies of Richard's text message threats, Danny's medical records, and selected evidence from Marcus's investigation. Patricia's expression changed as she read through the documents. He hurt your son? Deliberately, then threatened my family to keep it quiet. This matches his pattern, she said quietly. He's been escalating for years. Verbal abuse, financial manipulation, and now physical violence. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to destroy your husband's career and freedom. But I thought you should know first, so you can protect yourself and your daughters. She looked up at me with something like relief in her eyes. How long do I have? 48 hours before the federal investigation begins. I'd suggest consulting with your lawyer about emergency protective orders and asset protection. As I drove home, my phone rang. Melissa, Jake, we need to talk. Richard says you've been harassing his wife. I had a brief conversation with Patricia Morrison about our mutual situation. What mutual situation? Jake, you're scaring people. Richard thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. Melissa, in 48 hours, Richard Morrison is going to be arrested on federal charges. You have that long to decide if you want to go down with him. What are you talking about? Richard hasn't done anything illegal. Drug trafficking, insurance fraud, tax evasion, and assault on a minor. The FBI has been building a case for months. There was silence on the line. You're lying. Call him and ask him about his prescription drug resale business. Ask him about the offshore accounts Marcus discovered. Ask him how he's been funding those expensive hotels you've been visiting. More silence. Melissa, he's using you. He's used his position to manipulate and exploit dozens of people, including you. The man you think you love is a criminal who nearly killed our son to protect his secrets. I don't believe you. You don't have to. The evidence speaks for itself. After hanging up, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a suburban father with a normal family and normal problems. Tonight, I was implementing a systematic campaign to destroy a man's entire existence. But when I thought about Danny's frightened eyes and Melissa's casual dismissal of our son's trauma, I felt no guilt whatsoever. Some battles choose you. Monday morning arrived like Judgment Day. The federal agents showed up at Morrison Pharmaceutical at exactly 9:15 a.m., just as Richard was settling into his morning routine with his expensive coffee and arrogant smile. I wasn't there to watch, but Marcus had positioned himself across the street with a telephoto lens and real-time communication. The play-by-play was better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. They're walking him out in handcuffs, Marcus reported through my earpiece. 3 agents, full perp, walk through the lobby. Every employee in the building is watching their boss get arrested for federal crimes. I was sitting in the courthouse waiting room with Danny for our custody hearing, which had been moved up due to emergency circumstances. Patricia Webb sat beside me, reviewing final documents while Danny colored in a superhero coloring book. Daddy, why do you keep smiling? Danny asked, looking up from his picture of Captain America. Because good things are happening today, buddy. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. What did you do? Richard was arrested at work. Everyone's saying drug trafficking. I typed back. I told you this would happen. You had 48 hours to distance yourself. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response. This is insane. He's innocent. You set him up somehow. Check the news in about 20 minutes. The local news picked up the story faster than I'd expected. Regional pharmaceutical executive arrested in multi-million-dollar drug trafficking operation flashed across my phone screen, complete with photos of Richard being led away in handcuffs. But the real masterstroke came from Patricia Morrison's divorce lawyer. She'd filed emergency motions that morning, requesting immediate asset freezing and presenting evidence of Richard's criminal activities to support her claims. Every bank account, every hidden asset, every financial escape route was being systematically blocked. "Mr. Thompson?" A court clerk appeared at our waiting room door. "Judge Harrison will see you now." The custody hearing lasted exactly 18 minutes. Richard's fake text messages became irrelevant when the prosecutor's office confirmed he was facing federal charges that included witness intimidation and assault on a minor. Melissa's claims about my instability crumbled when Danny's medical records and the school counselor's reports painted a clear picture of trauma caused by Richard Morrison. Judge Harrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen enough custody battles to recognize the truth when it was presented clearly. "Mr. Thompson, I'm granting you emergency full custody of Daniel. Mrs. Thompson, your visitation will be supervised until we can establish that you're not exposing the child to dangerous individuals." Melissa broke down crying in the courtroom. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. Richard would never hurt a child. Ma'am, the defendant is currently facing federal charges for assault on your son, among other crimes. Until those charges are resolved, I cannot allow unsupervised contact." As we left the courthouse, Danny slipped his small hand into mine. "Does this mean I don't have to see Mr. Richard anymore?" "Never again, buddy. Never again." By afternoon, the full scope of the investigation was making headlines. Morrison Pharmaceutical was cooperating fully with federal authorities, and 3 other employees had been arrested in connection with the drug trafficking operation. Richard's carefully constructed corporate empire was collapsing in real time. Marcus called with updates that kept getting better. Patricia Morrison filed a restraining order against her husband, citing documented threats against her and their children. She's also turned over 2 years of recorded conversations where Richard discussed his illegal activities. What about the other affairs? That's where it gets interesting. Turns out the babysitter he was sleeping with is 17 years old. State Attorney General is now looking at statutory rape charges on top of everything else. I felt a grim satisfaction as each piece of Richard's life crumbled. This wasn't random destruction. It was surgical removal of a cancer that had infected my family's life. That evening, Melissa called sobbing hysterically. "Jake, they arrested Richard again. Something about statutory rape. I don't understand what's happening. This morning everything was fine, and now you're seeing who he really is. But he loves me. He was going to leave his wife for me. Melissa, he was never going to leave his wife. He was using you just like he used that teenage babysitter and who knows how many other women. You're lying. You orchestrated all of this somehow." "I didn't orchestrate anything. I simply made sure the right people knew about crimes that were already being committed. Richard Morrison destroyed himself. I just sped up the timeline." There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice smaller and broken. "What about us? What about our family? Our family ended the moment you chose to protect the man who hurt our son instead of protecting Danny." "Jake," I was confused. I thought Richard really cared about me. He made me feel special. He made you feel special by convincing you to betray your own child's safety. Think about that, Melissa. Really think about it." After hanging up, I found Danny in his room building a Lego castle. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes brighter than I'd seen them in weeks. "Daddy, I heard on the news that the bad man got arrested. Does that mean he can't hurt other kids anymore?" "That's exactly what it means, son. Sometimes bad people get away with hurting others for a long time, but eventually, the truth comes out. Are you the one who told the truth about him?" I sat down beside my son, choosing my words carefully. I made sure the right people knew what kind of person he really was. The rest was up to them. Danny nodded seriously. then went back to building his castle. I'm glad he can't hurt anyone anymore. Maybe now I won't have bad dreams. That night, as I tucked Danny into bed, I realized something had fundamentally changed in both of us. My son was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, no longer carrying the burden of adult secrets and fears. And I had learned something important about the difference between revenge and justice. Richard Morrison's world had collapsed not because I'd destroyed an innocent man, but because I'd simply removed the walls he'd built to hide his true nature from consequences. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting the truth do its work. 3 weeks after Richard's arrest, the full scope of his criminal empire became public knowledge. The FBI had uncovered a prescription drug trafficking network worth over $2 million, involving corrupt doctors in 4 states and black market dealers who sold medications to desperate patients at inflated prices. But it was Danny's testimony that sealed Richard's fate completely. The federal prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chun, had requested a victim impact statement from my son. At first, I was hesitant. Danny had been through enough trauma. But his therapist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, suggested it might help him reclaim his power over what had happened. Sometimes children heal faster when they feel they've helped protect other children from the same danger, she explained during our session. Danny surprised everyone with his courage. The courtroom was packed with media, federal agents, and other victims of Richard's schemes. Morrison Pharmaceutical had fired 17 employees connected to the trafficking operation, and 3 other executives were facing charges. But all eyes were on my 10-year-old son as he walked to the witness stand. Richard sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, no longer the intimidating corporate executive who'd terrorized a child in his office. 3 weeks in federal custody had stripped away his arrogance, leaving behind a pale, defeated man who couldn't meet Danny's eyes. Danny, can you tell us what happened the day you were injured at your mother's office? Prosecutor Chen asked gently. My son spoke clearly and calmly, his voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. I was waiting for Mommy to finish work, and I accidentally knocked over Mr. Richard's coffee cup when I was looking at the fish tank. He got really angry and started yelling at me. What happened next? He grabbed my shoulders really hard and shook me. It hurt. Then he pushed me backward, and I hit my head on the corner of his desk. I saw stars and everything went fuzzy. Did Mr. Richard help you after you were hurt? No. He told me it was my fault for being clumsy, and that if I told anyone what really happened, he'd make sure Mommy lost her job, and we'd have to live in our car. Several jurors visibly reacted to that statement. The idea of an adult threatening a seriously injured child was clearly resonating with them. Were you scared of Mr. Richard after that? Danny nodded. Really scared. He was so much bigger than me, and his voice was so angry. I had nightmares about him for weeks. I was afraid he'd hurt Mommy or Daddy if I told the truth. Danny, are you still scared of Mr. Richard? My son looked directly at Richard for the first time since entering the courtroom. Richard had shrunk into his chair, unable to maintain eye contact with the child he'd brutalized. No, Danny said with quiet confidence. Daddy taught me that bullies are only scary when nobody knows what they really are. Now everybody knows. The defense attorney, an expensive lawyer Richard's family had hired, tried to shake Danny's testimony during cross-examination. It was a mistake. Danny, isn't it possible you misunderstood Mr. Richard's actions? Maybe he was trying to help you up after you fell. He didn't help me up. He pushed me down, and he told me to lie about it. Children sometimes confuse accidents with, I know the difference between an accident and someone hurting me on purpose, Danny interrupted, his voice stronger. Mr. Richard was angry and he wanted to hurt me because I spilled his coffee. The lawyer quickly moved on, realizing he was only making his client look worse by badgering a child victim. When Danny's testimony concluded, Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to Richard, despite the shared name, commended his bravery. Young man, your courage in telling the truth has helped protect many other children. Thank you. As we left the courthouse, Danny walked with his shoulders straighter than I'd seen in months. Daddy, do you think Mr. Richard will hurt other kids now? No, son. He's going to prison for a very long time. The judge will make sure of that. That afternoon, the verdict came back faster than anyone expected. Guilty on all counts: drug trafficking, racketeering, assault on a minor, witness intimidation, and tax evasion. The federal sentencing guidelines suggested 25 years minimum, but the real justice came from unexpected sources. Patricia Morrison had been awarded full custody of her daughters and 90% of Richard's assets in their divorce settlement. She'd also filed a civil lawsuit against him for emotional distress and domestic abuse, seeking additional damages. Morrison Pharmaceutical had fired Richard and was cooperating fully with federal investigators to avoid corporate charges. His pension was forfeit, his stock options voided, and his reputation in the pharmaceutical industry permanently destroyed. The teenage babysitter he'd been abusing came forward with her own testimony, resulting in additional state charges for statutory rape and exploitation of a minor. Most satisfying of all, 3 other women from his company filed sexual harassment lawsuits, claiming Richard had used his position to coerce them into relationships under threat of job loss. The man who'd built his life on intimidation and manipulation was being systematically destroyed by the very people he'd victimized. Melissa had tried to visit Richard in federal detention, but he'd refused to see her. His lawyer had apparently advised him that contact with co-conspirators could hurt his sentencing appeal. The woman who'd sacrificed her family for him had been discarded the moment she became a liability. She'd called me crying 2 days after the verdict. Jake, I know I made terrible mistakes, but maybe we could try counseling? For Danny's sake. Melissa, you chose to protect the man who nearly killed our son. You chose to help him terrorize Danny into silence. Those aren't mistakes. Those are fundamental failures of character. People change. I could change. The time to change was when our son came home with his head cracked open. You had 3 weeks to choose your family over your affair partner. You chose wrong every single time. The divorce papers had been filed the day after Richard's sentencing. I was seeking full custody with supervised visitation for Melissa, and given the circumstances, my lawyer was confident we'd get it. That evening, Danny and I were making dinner together when he asked me something that stopped me cold. Daddy, do you think Mommy will ever come home? I knelt down to his eye level, choosing my words carefully. Buddy, sometimes adults make choices that can't be undone. Mommy chose to protect someone who hurt you instead of protecting you. That's not something I can forgive or forget. Does that mean it's just going to be you and me from now on? Is that okay with you? Danny thought about it seriously, then nodded. Yeah, we're a pretty good team. Yes, we are. As I tucked him into bed that night, Danny was already sleeping peacefully. No nightmares, no fear, no adult burdens weighing on his small shoulders. Richard Morrison would spend the next 25 years in federal prison, and every person who'd enabled his crimes was facing their own consequences. Justice had been served completely. 6 months after Richard Morrison's sentencing, the ripple effects of his downfall were still spreading through our community like shockwaves from an earthquake. Morrison Pharmaceutical had been bought out by a larger company, and the new management was implementing strict oversight policies to prevent future criminal activity. 17 families received compensation from the company's Victim Relief Fund, including the parents of 3 other children Richard had disciplined over the years. But the most unexpected consequence came from Patricia Morrison herself. She'd used her divorce settlement money to establish a foundation for children who'd been victims of adult workplace violence. The Patricia Morrison Children's Safety Foundation provided counseling, legal support, and advocacy for families dealing with similar situations. Your son's courage in testifying inspired this, she told me during our coffee meeting at the same shop where we'd first discussed destroying her ex-husband. Danny showed other children that it's safe to tell the truth about adults who hurt them. Patricia looked different now, stronger, more confident. The tired, defeated woman I'd met months ago had been replaced by someone with purpose and determination. "How are your daughters handling everything?" I asked. "Better than I expected. They're in therapy, of course, but they're also relieved. They've been walking on eggshells around their father for years, afraid of setting off his temper. Now they can just be kids again." It struck me how many children Richard had terrorized, not just Danny. His own daughters, the teenage babysitter, probably dozens of other kids who'd crossed his path over the years. One man's need for control and dominance had created a wake of traumatized children. "Patricia, I want you to know, what I did to Richard wasn't personal revenge. It was about stopping a predator." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Jake, you saved my daughters from years of escalating abuse. Richard was getting worse, more violent, more controlling. If you hadn't exposed him when you did." She shuddered. "I don't want to think about where it would have ended." That afternoon, Danny had his final appointment with Dr. Martinez. 6 months of therapy had transformed my son from a frightened, guilt-ridden child into a confident kid who laughed easily and slept through the night. "Mr. Thompson, Danny has made remarkable progress," Dr. Martinez told me while Danny played with toys in her office. "His trauma responses have virtually disappeared, and he's developed healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with adult conflicts." "What about long-term effects?" "Children are remarkably resilient when they feel safe and supported. Danny knows he was believed, protected, and that justice was served. Those are powerful healing factors. I watched my son building a castle with toy blocks, chatting happily about his plans for summer camp. The fearful, quiet child from 6 months ago was completely gone." "Dr. Martinez, he asked me something yesterday that I wasn't sure how to answer. He wanted to know if what happened to him helped other kids." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that his bravery in speaking up helped catch a bad man who might have hurt other children." She smiled. "That's exactly right. Danny understands now that he's not a victim. He's a survivor who helped protect others. That's incredibly powerful for a child's self-concept." As we drove home, Danny was unusually quiet before finally speaking up. "Daddy, I got a letter today." "From who?" "A girl named Emma. She said her dad hurt her too, but after she heard about me telling the truth, she told her mom what happened. Now her dad can't hurt her anymore either." I had to pull over because my vision blurred with tears. The courage my 10-year-old son had shown in that courtroom had inspired other children to speak up about their own abuse. "That's incredible, buddy. You helped protect another kid." Dr. Martinez says that's what heroes do. They help other people even when it's scary. That evening, I found myself thinking about Melissa. She'd been granted supervised visitation with Danny twice a month, but she'd only used it 3 times in 6 months. Each visit was awkward and strained, with Danny being polite but distant toward his mother. The woman who'd once been the center of our family had become essentially a stranger to her own son. My phone rang around 9 p.m. "Melissa, Jake, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something." Her voice sounded different, smaller, more fragile than I remembered. "What is it, Melissa?" "I've been in therapy for 4 months now. Real therapy, not just court-mandated counseling. I'm starting to understand what I did to Danny, to our family." I waited for her to continue. "I convinced myself that Richard really loved me, that he was going to leave his wife and we'd build a life together. But my therapist helped me see that he was manipulating me from the beginning. He isolated me from you, made me doubt my own judgment, and then convinced me to protect him instead of protecting our son. Melissa, Danny nearly died, and you helped his attacker cover it up." "I know. God, Jake, I know." I replay that night over and over. Danny coming home injured, scared, and me coaching him to lie because Richard told me it would protect our future together. I chose a fantasy over my own child's safety. There was genuine anguish in her voice, but it was too late and not nearly enough. "What do you want me to say, Melissa? I want to know if there's any chance, any possibility that someday you might forgive me. Not to get back together, but so Danny doesn't have to carry the weight of his parents hating each other." I thought about Danny's question from months ago. Does this mean it's just going to be you and me from now on? He'd seemed relieved by the answer, not disappointed. Melissa, forgiveness isn't something I can just decide to give you. It's something you'd have to earn over years of proving you've actually changed. And honestly, I don't think Danny needs that burden. He's my son too, Jake. Then you should have acted like his mother when it mattered most. After hanging up, I checked on Danny one more time before bed. He was sleeping peacefully, clutching a stuffed animal that Patricia Morrison's foundation had sent him, a small bear wearing a superhero cape with a note that said, "For a real-life hero." Tomorrow, Danny would start summer camp. Next month, we were moving to a new house across town, a fresh start in a place with no memories of Richard Morrison or the family that used to live here. The man who'd nearly destroyed our lives was serving a 25-year federal sentence. My son was healing and thriving, and I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that justice is served completely. 2 years later, Danny and I were standing in the kitchen of our new house, making pancakes on a Saturday morning when he asked me the question that would define everything we'd been through. "Daddy, do you think I'll ever be like Mr. Richard when I grow up?" I stopped flipping pancakes and turned to look at my 12-year-old son. He was taller now, his face losing the baby softness that had made him look so vulnerable in that hospital room years ago. But his eyes still held the wisdom of someone who'd faced real evil and survived. "What makes you ask that, buddy?" "Well, he was somebody's little boy once, right? And he grew up to hurt kids. What if I have that inside me too?" The question hit me like a physical blow. In all our therapy sessions, all our conversations about healing and moving forward, I'd never considered that Danny might be worried about becoming his own abuser. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled him into the chair beside me. "Son, do you remember what you felt like when Mr. Richard hurt you?" "Yeah." "Scared and confused and really, really sad." "And do you ever want to make another kid feel that way?" Danny's eyes widened with horror. "No, never. That would be terrible. That's the difference, Danny. Richard Morrison enjoyed having power over people who couldn't fight back. He liked making people afraid. You could never be like him because the idea of hurting someone innocent makes you feel sick inside. But what if I get really angry someday? What if someone makes me mad and I lose control?" I thought carefully about how to answer this. How to give my son the tools he'd need to navigate a world where good people sometimes do bad things, and bad people often disguise themselves as good. "Danny, anger is normal. Every person gets angry sometimes. But there's a huge difference between feeling angry and choosing to hurt someone weaker than you. Richard Morrison made a choice every single time he hurt someone. He chose to use his size, his position, his authority to intimidate and harm people who couldn't defend themselves. So it's about choices? Exactly. Every day, we choose who we want to be. Richard chose to be a bully, a criminal, and someone who hurt children. You choose every day to be kind, honest, and protective of people who need help. Danny nodded slowly, processing this. Is that why you stopped him? Because you made a choice to protect kids? Yes. When I learned what he'd done to you, I had to choose between letting him continue hurting people or making sure he faced consequences. I chose to protect you and other children. Did you want to hurt him back? Like really hurt him? The question was more perceptive than I'd expected from a 12-year-old. Yes, son. I wanted to hurt him very badly for what he did to you. But wanting something and doing it are different things. I chose to use the law, the truth, and his own crimes against him instead of violence. Because violence would make you like him? Because violence would have solved nothing and created new problems. The way I handled it meant Richard couldn't hurt anyone ever again. His victims got justice, and I didn't become someone you'd be afraid of. Danny was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this lesson. Daddy, I think I understand something now. What's that? The strongest people aren't the ones who hurt others. They're the ones who protect others, even when it's really hard. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. My son had just articulated something it had taken me years of military service and life experience to understand. That's exactly right, buddy. Real strength is using your power to protect people who can't protect themselves. After breakfast, we drove to Danny's baseball game. As I watched him play shortstop, confident, laughing with his teammates, completely free of the fear that had once consumed him, I realized something profound had happened. Richard Morrison had intended to teach my son that victims should stay silent, that powerful people could hurt others without consequences, and that children had no recourse against adult violence. Instead, Danny had learned that speaking truth to power works, that bullies can be defeated by brave people working together, and that justice, though sometimes slow, is ultimately more powerful than intimidation. During the seventh inning stretch, I noticed a familiar figure walking toward the bleachers. Melissa, looking nervous and uncertain, carrying a small gift bag. "Is it okay if I watch the rest of the game?" she asked quietly. It was the first time she'd shown up to one of Danny's activities without court-mandated supervision. I studied her face, looking for signs of the woman who'd chosen her a fair partner over her son's safety. "That's up to Danny," I said. She sat 3 rows behind me, and when Danny spotted her during his next at-bat, he gave her a small wave before stepping into the batter's box. He hit a double, drove in 2 runs, and looked genuinely happy when she cheered for him. After the game, Danny jogged over to where we were both standing. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart. You played amazing. I brought you something." She handed him the gift bag. Inside was a small wooden plaque that read, "Danny Thompson, truth teller, hero, survivor." "I made this in my woodworking class," Melissa said quietly. "I wanted you to know that I understand now what you did took incredible courage. And I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to protect you when you needed me most." Danny looked at the plaque for a long moment, then at his mother. "Thanks, Mom. It's really nice." The interaction was polite but distant. Danny had forgiven his mother in the way children do, without malice or ongoing anger. But he'd also learned to protect himself emotionally from people who'd proven unreliable. As we drove home, Danny asked me one final question that surprised me with its insight. "Daddy, do you think Mr. Richard ever thinks about what he did to me?" "I don't know, son." "Why do you ask?" "Because I hope he does. Not because I want him to feel bad, but because maybe if he thinks about it enough, he'll understand that kids are real people with real feelings. Maybe he'll become a better person in prison." The maturity and compassion in that statement took my breath away. My 12-year-old son, who'd been brutalized and terrorized by an adult, still held space in his heart for the possibility of his attacker's redemption. That night, as I tucked Danny into bed in our new house, safe, secure, surrounded by friends and opportunities, I reflected on everything we'd been through. Richard Morrison was serving his sentence in federal prison. Melissa was rebuilding her life slowly, learning to be the mother she should have been from the beginning. Patricia Morrison's foundation had helped over 100 families deal with similar situations. But the most important victory was sleeping peacefully in the room next to mine. A young man who'd learned that truth is more powerful than lies, that courage is contagious, and that real strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. The lesson from our story isn't about revenge or justice or even healing from trauma. It's simpler and more profound than that. When you choose to protect the innocent instead of protecting yourself, when you speak truth instead of convenient lies, when you use your strength to shield the vulnerable instead of advancing your own interests, that's when you discover who you really are. And sometimes, that discovery changes not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you. The little boy who was afraid to speak up became a young man who inspired other children to find their voices. The father who could have chosen violence chose justice instead. And somewhere, in ways we'll never fully know, those choices rippled outward to make the world a little bit safer for other families. That's the power of making the right choice when everything inside you wants to make the wrong one. What would you have done in this father's position? How far would you go to protect your child from someone who hurt them? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below.